Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you all for joining us here this morning. Before I kick it off to my leadership team, I wanted just to set the table for today's briefing on data related to traffic stops as part of our efforts to be compliant with the consent decree. When I ran for mayor and when I took my oath of office in January of 2022, I made us as a city being compliant with the consent decree a key priority of this administration. And today's release of this data is a step towards that progress and a step towards a better direction for our city and our residents. As part of the consent decree, it requires us to be compliant with paragraph 264, which outlines a requirement for the city to collect data as it relates to search and seizure. Never before has any administration done this kind of work to allow us to be more compliant with the consent decree. Also want to stress the importance that the data that we've released today has yet to be evaluated by independent third-party partner. That is still required, and it's required to provide more context to the community in terms of what this data entails. Furthermore, this specific area of search and seizure is just one of three areas we're looking at along the use of force and the work we're doing around our co-responder model of policing across all 5 police districts. Now, as we all know in this room, and as I know my command staff knows, there are a number of different factors that go into traffic stops. It would not only be unfair, but also unethical for the city, as well as the public, to jump to conclusions and make rash, premature decisions just based on initial numbers without understanding the full scope and context around this topic, and more importantly, whether or not there are indeed any problems. Reacting too quickly at this juncture can have very severe consequences for the city and the public, and for the men and women who are working very hard in our police department to keep our streets safe and secure. Now, if the independent evaluation and or the monitoring team reveals that there are legitimate issues, the public can be rest assured that we will take corrective actions to address them. And as I said before at the onset of my comments, this level of transparency is unprecedented. The first time the city, alongside the DOJ and the monitoring team, have collected any empirical data since the decree went into effect in 2014. I also want to say this. I believe that we can be pro-public safety, pro-accountability, and pro-justice and equity as it relates to policing in our city. Too often, not just in Cleveland, but across the country, we are seeing two camps. You're either pro-police or pro-reform. And I refuse to buy into that mindset. And I know my command staff believes the same thing as well. Here in Cleveland, under my administration, we are both, and have not only displayed that through our investments, but those investments have already produced tangible results in our city. From the work we've done with our RISE investments in the men and women of our police department, from the 50% pay increase, to the $5,000 sign-on bonuses, to the fast-track promotions for recruits, to the fact that we increased pay for current officers by up to 25%. We've also raised the age for folks to join our police department. For the first time in our city's history, we have a dedicated team, our police accountability team, led by Dr. Anderson and her team, all focused on an all-of-government approach so we can be compliant with the consent decree and manage our department as a city without the DOJ overseeing our department. And because of these investments, because of this all-of-government approach with the community working alongside us, we've seen tangible results in our city. Violent crime is down in Cleveland. Homicides down this summer by nearly 40%. Grand theft auto down by 20%. Robberies down by 13%, and overall violent crime down by 13%. Real results, real change. And lastly, before I give it over to Dr. Anderson, we were stuck 3 years ago. We were stuck in terms of our progress when it comes to the consent decree. But already, in just 1 year under Dr. Anderson's leadership, we've received nearly 50 upgrades from the monitoring team in terms of our compliance with the consent decree. Now, do we have a long way to go? Absolutely. But this administration, with the public support, has made tangible progress. I would also say this: the residents of our city are demanding tough accountability, but also thoughtful, aggressive law enforcement to keep our streets safe and secure. I hear complaints from residents every single day about the important need of traffic enforcement. You talk to members of City Council, they say the same thing. Just several weeks ago, a young boy, 7 years old, killed in a hit and run. We're going to keep our streets safe, but also do it in a constitutionally appropriate way. And I believe, as a black man in this city, not just as the mayor, but as a black man in this city, I know in my heart of hearts that the men and women of this police department wake up every single day recognizing the importance of constitutionally appropriate policing. I know it, I see it every day, and they are doing a fantastic job keeping our streets safe. Dr. Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Lee Anderson. I am the Executive Director of the Police Accountability Team. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. I want you to know that this report did not fall out of the sky, okay? Per paragraph 264 of the consent decree, within 90 days of development of the protocol and annually thereafter, CDP will conduct an assessment and issue a report summarizing its investigatory stop, search, and arrest data. That is what we have done. The second part of the paragraph requires us to analyze that data, okay? To make sure that we look at taking steps to correct any problems and build upon successes. We will make this report publicly available, okay? So we are looking to be in compliance with that paragraph. Up until this day, that paragraph has been in non-compliance. We look forward to moving these descriptive statistics to the public so that they can critically engage with them, okay? The other thing that I want to note is everyone is saying, is this data good or bad, right? It has not been analyzed. And one of the things that's important about descriptive statistics is that it's just what it is. It describes the what, not the how or not the why, just what is happening. And that is something that we have to look into to figure out why this is happening. But what we do know is that traffic enforcement is happening and it is being successful. And I will talk about some of those rates in a second. One of the things that I also want to know is that we are looking for additional help to help us assess this data and figure out the why. Okay, so we understand the what, we want to know why things are happening. We're going to move forward to research think tanks that look at this type of information and tell us, is there profiling? Okay, is there not profiling? What are the successes? What are the officers doing right? Where can we use more assistance, more training? Is it a policy? Is it bad actors? Is it systemic? Okay, these are questions that we cannot answer, and it is not ethical to jump to those conclusions at this point with just descriptive data. Okay, it is not the data that gives you any type of correlations. Right now, it is just the numbers, the summary of the numbers. So let's move into the summary of the numbers. I also want to state, when everyone is saying, are we better or worse? While we are grateful that the Department of Justice is here helping us get better, one of the things that I want to note is that in their investigation in 2014, they note on page 6, although we did not investigate CDP search and seizure and arrest practices, our force review revealed concerns we would be remiss not to address. So I want to move into the fact that they highlighted this area as an issue, but they did not investigate it. They did not research it, which means there is no empirical data from 10 years ago which tells us if we're doing better or worse. We don't know if it was 10 times better. We don't know if now it's 10 times worse. We're unsure about that. This is our first time doing baseline data so that we're able to tell the differences between what's happening on the street and what we're able to analyze in terms of research. With that said, I'll give a little bit of statistics from the 2022 stop report. We do know that 1 in 3 stops, were non-residents, okay? 95% of the over 16,000 stops were traffic stops. The reasons for citations were speeding, running stop signs, and running red lights. Again, as the mayor mentioned, we just had a 7-year-old that passed away as a result of these infractions, okay? In the citations, it is important to note that 3 out of 4 individuals were cited. So even though people are being stopped, they are also being cited for breaking the law, okay? We also found that for citations, this was similar across race. With that, among citations, Blacks were actually cited less than whites in this process. I want to get into use of force, okay, because this has been a big topic that everyone has talked about when it comes to investigatory stops, okay? With use of force, again, there were over 16,000 stops. Only 34 of those stops involved force, which gives us a 0.2% where force was used. These numbers are so important because they give us this baseline to be able to move forward and state, okay, are we giving the community what the community is asking for, but are we also living up to constitutional standards for policing reform in the city of Cleveland? Thank you for your time.
Director Drummond, then Chief Top.
Good morning. Thanks, Dr. Henson and Mayor Pitt. It's important that we are transparent, and this is what this is about, to get the reports out to the general public so they can take a look at it. But equally important is to understand this is baseline data, as stated before. We have to have context to it, have to have an independent third party take a look at it, analyze it, give us the information so we can utilize it here in the city of Cleveland, make sure that our officers are policing constitutionally. From my experience, not only as the current safety director, but also as the police chief for 2 years, as a deputy chief of field operations. All 5 districts report to the deputy chief of field operations. I did that for 7 years. I was a commander in the District 5 for 9 years. I have a wealth of experience relative to some of the things that we're talking about now. And more specifically, this data is about traffic stops. Again, it's important that we add context, and that's what's missing from this particular data. I understand from probably a public standpoint, the concern when you have the baseline data, but it's just that baseline data. You have to take all other things and other factors into consideration and not just the baseline data. If through the analysis it's found that there are violations of the Constitution, we'll hold officers accountable. We have here in the city of Cleveland layers on top of layers relative to oversight. Layers on top of layers relative to oversight. We have the Office of Professional Standards, CPRB, the Civilian Police Review Board, the CPC. We have, of course, the consent decree with the monitoring team as well as the DOJ. Layers on top of layers to hold officers accountable when they are not constitutionally policing in our community. But just equally as important is when the officers are doing the right thing, and I believe that they are, that we support them. This particular report on the surface could potentially have a chilling effect. I wanted to be very careful and guarding what I said here today, but it's important that we put it out there as well. The officers read these reports. They look at these reports as well. We asked them, the chief and I and the mayor and so forth, to go out there and provide safety to our community. We asked them to do that constitutionally, and they are doing it. I believe they're doing it constitutionally and so forth. So when they are doing it out there, my expectation is that we support them, and then those who are not policing constitutionally, we hold them accountable, and we're doing that. In all these traffic stops, over 16,000 traffic stops, the officers fill out forms which are reviewed by supervisors. Supervisors make sure that the stops are done constitutionally. And over 97%, and Dr. Anderson can correct me, 97% of those stops, there were no issues from the supervisors. That's important. That's really important to understand. We must support the officers when they're doing the right things, and I believe that they're doing the right things. Again, we have such layers of oversight here in the city of Cleveland that if you look and research, and I'm sure you will, that you don't have that in most other states, and especially states that have consent decrees or cities that have consent decrees. Also important to understand, we've been under a consent decree for almost 10 years. We've had numerous police academies since then. So quite a few of the officers currently policing here in the city of Cleveland, all they know is the consent decree and the requirements of the consent decree. That's all they know. They know de-escalation training. They know that to police constitutionally relative to our use of force. Our use of force numbers are substantially down. Look at the stats and the figures that Dr. Anderson just gave you relative to the over 16,000 traffic stops. And out of that, the percentage Dr. Anderson is 0.2 uses of force. And those are not significant uses of force as well. So again, it's important that we continue to dialogue. I ask for the general public's patience as we have an independent party review the data. And if it proves that or shows that a couple of officers did not police constitutionally, we'll hold them accountable. Again, thank you.
Chief Todd.
So good morning. A couple points I want to make. One is to the community. I want to reassure the community that we are committed to transparency and we are committed to working on this report to make sure that this is evaluated and that if there are changes that need to be made, we will make those changes. Also, I want to, speak directly to our men and women. I want to know them to know that we support the work that they're doing and that the report is data alone at this point. And my request to them is they continue the hard work they're doing every day and their commitment to the community. As you know, with law enforcement, you know that there's violent crime that exists, but the big outcry always from the community is about traffic enforcement. It's about the quality of life issues that are seen throughout the neighborhoods. And this report reflects the traffic enforcement that's done throughout the city. And we look forward to seeing the results of the evaluation that's done. As Director Drummond had mentioned that we have oversight, we also have body cameras. The interactions with the community is reflected in the body camera footage. The officers are wearing their cameras when these traffic stops happen, and these incidents are being recorded. When you see a speeder, for example, you're looking at the vehicle, not the person. You don't get that plate information that really gives the demographics until you approach the vehicle itself. So you have to look at that factor. You're looking at the vehicle and what the vehicle is doing and not necessarily the person driving it, or you don't have that valuable information of who that vehicle is owned by until you actually approach the vehicle. So I want to make sure that those things aren't forgotten with this report. And as Dr. Anderson and Mayor Bibb stated, we are at a good place with the consent decree. We had no downgrades. We had, 50 additional, upgrades in this report. And we at the Division of Police are committed to continuing to be in compliance with the consent decree and to have constitutional policing. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So before we take questions, I just want to say this.
Can you take the microphone there?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Thank you. Before we get to questions, I just want to say this. We as an administration are always going to address these truths head on. We know that race is a complicated, nuanced topic, but at the end of the day, it is our mandate and our responsibility from my seat as the mayor, from the command staff to Dr. Anderson and her team. We are always going to focus on constitutionally appropriate policing. while at the same time meeting the demands of our residents that they want to see aggressive law enforcement. They want to see traffic enforcement to keep our streets safe and secure. And that command, that demand and mandate for me is not going to change. This is only baseline data. We have to analyze this data and move forward from there. But this has to be a community collective effort to have hard conversations, while at the same time making sure we as a city become compliant with the consent decree, while also making sure we continue to invest in police, support our police, and do whatever we can to keep Cleveland safe. Thank you. Questions?
Chief Todd, I have a question. The Marshall Project Cleveland and WS News 5 did an extensive analysis of your 2023 data. The probable cause category found hundreds of reasons why officers stopped motorists, pedestrians, and did searches. For example, body language. Should Clevelanders be worried about officers using such what seem to be questionable policies or practices like body language to do a search?
So I can say that I have not seen your entire report at this time.
I wouldn't mislead you.
I'm sorry?
I wouldn't mislead you. That's in your data.
Okay, so I don't know that body language is not enough for a traffic stop, so I would have to see what other information is related to that.
It wasn't a traffic stop. It was the reason after the stop was made to conduct a search of the individual for the vehicle.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question. So if, that could be anything, and that's something that does carry with the body cameras. If the officer's approaching a vehicle and somebody reaches under the seat, is it something they should be concerned about? If they are, trying to hide something in the vehicle, is that something they should be concerned about? So those are things that they are trained in, and it would have to evaluate the actual stop itself and compare the footage and the details of the report to, properly evaluate that.
Thank you.
I have several questions. I might have missed the first one. And you guys said you guys didn't have this looked over by an independent third party. Do you guys have a timeline for that? Or?
Dr. Anderson?
Yes, we're currently looking at third parties right now. We're looking at research think tanks. I'm not going to mention the ones that we're looking at because we want to make sure it's a fair and balanced process for the individuals that come in and are able to assess the data. But that has happened immediately. It is now.
Do you have a timeline of when?
We're hoping within the next month we can secure them and then make sure that we transfer the data and start having conversations with them for the analysis.
And for the public safety director, I know he mentioned for officers who do not police constitutionally, they'll be held accountable. What would that look like?
That's a good question. We have processes in place depending on where the complaints lead to. There's a process through the Office of Professional Standards for non-criminal complaints. If they're criminal complaints, then they'll be transferred over to Internal Affairs and they'll follow those particular processes.
And just one last question. I know another area that's kind of being looked over right now is use of force, and I believe crisis intervention. Could we expect any new details into that in the future, and how soon?
Absolutely. So one of the things that you'll see in the 15th semi-annual report is that out of all of the use of forces, a very, very small number of them were violated policy. Okay, so we already have data on that in the 15th semi-annual report. So we are holding meetings with the monitoring team bi-weekly to talk about uses of force, to talk about with the chief, are there any issues with tactics or things like that, and how we're moving forward to correct those issues. The other piece is that crisis intervention is doing very well. We have given them not only the pilot data, which has been completed, but they're getting ready to start the actual assessment now. We have provided them with all the information that they need for assessment, and crisis intervention is one of the areas that is closest to moving into substantial compliance. And we're very excited about the work that our crisis teams are doing on the street and how that is translating into compliance with the consent decree.
Question about the lapse in time. This is the 2022 data set, correct? Obviously,
Yes.
a lot can change. We're almost in 2025 now. I don't know if this is exactly a proper picture to present if this is data from 2022 and saying crime is down this summer. A lot can change. So why the delay? Why is it taking so long to get this report out?
Thank you. Yes. Hi, my name is Dr. Rania Issa. I'm the data coordinator for the Cleveland Division of Police. That's a great question. So we work with the monitoring team to establish a calendar of when the reports are due. We have a report due every quarter, and the stop report was slotted for the last quarter of the year. So anytime that happens, whether it's crisis intervention or use of force, that particular report has to cover the entire calendar year for the previous year. So that's why there's a lag. Unfortunately, that was the topic that was slotted. So we could, visit it in the future, but whatever report is slotted for the fourth quarter has to unfortunately, cover information for the calendar year because it's due right at the end of the year. So there's no way for the team to put together an 80-page report before the year is over. I hope that answers your question.
I wanted to ask.
Dr. Anderson has a follow-up, then we'll get to you, sir.
Oh, sorry.
So I also wanted to note that if you look at other consent decree cities, Cleveland is one of the only cities that is looking at search and seizure data that is looking to comply with the paragraphs that state that this information needs to be collected. New Orleans is also in an area where their data is also lapsed. So I think you should take a look at their data as well as Baltimore. So this is something that is really typical for consent decree cities only because of the requirements in the monitoring plan when the dates fall, and then as well as they have to have a full assessment in order to move forward. So for example, crisis intervention, we're looking at 2023 data. Yes, 2023 data, for crisis intervention for this space. And so we are now just starting to collect this data. The systems were only created to collect it in 2021. For search and seizure. And so now the next thing that we need to do is look at 2022, then we're already looking at 2023 data. So we're hoping to catch up so there's not a lag, but because of where it's placed at, that's why there is that difference.
I did have one follow-up quickly. 3 out of 4 traffic stops did not warrant a citation. Is that standard practice number?
No.
To let people off without, if they are speeding or whatever?
It's flipped. So 3 out of 4 people that were stopped are actually cited.
Right, so 25% of people who are stopped are not cited. So is that standard practice? Is that appropriate? Is that just officer discretion to let them off without a ticket if they're stopped?
That's a very valid question, and it's officer discretion. There are situations, and, I know Dr. Anderson and I talked about it in just my time in law enforcement. There are times that you come across somebody that pulls at your heartstrings and the impact of writing that ticket is going to make, and then you make that decision not to go forward with writing the citation.
With the demand from the public to enforce traffic, it's like that's a fine line to walk, essentially, in that case. If there are children
I can tell you that from my personal experiences, when I've done traffic stops and I pulled over a mother with her kids in the car, and I knew the impact that would have on her, I couldn't go home at night and know that, that citation is going to suspend her license. It's going to cost her, money she can't afford. So there is, I'm not going to judge someone based on, them making that decision.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask, we know that this data is just a spreadsheet. We also know that you agreed that our 2023 data was correct that we used for our report. So why do we need a third-party analysis when the answers seem to be right in front of us?
Dr. Anderson or Dr. Issa?
Sure. Okay, I'm gonna go first. Yes, I'll go ahead and just go ahead and start to answer that question. That's a really great question. I think for us, there are a lot of complexities in the data that are collected. So for us, we would like to, get some assistance in uncovering really the context. So I know that that's come up. I heard the director mention context. Context matters. So we really would like more information on why individuals were stopped to begin with. When an individual was arrested, we'd like to go ahead and unpack, why there was an arrest. We know by looking at the descriptives that warrants top the list for us. That's very closely tied to searches. So really what I'm trying to point to is there's a lot of context that needs to be unpacked that essentially for us is the next step. So we would like to work closely with that third party to help explain how the data is collected. And there are some nuances. So like you said, you received a spreadsheet, right? We look at that information very closely, and we know that there are factors that are extremely relevant that are collected and that are not collected that help tell the story. So that would be our position as to why we would, ask for some assistance to, help with the context. Thank you.
Additionally, I'd like to say that your story did have body cam footage where there was an individual that was speeding, and in the individual noted that they were speeding at the time, the officer did, right? So I just want to note that we're also looking at body camera footage. We need this third party to look at that body camera footage, right? Were they speeding? Were they not speeding? Was discretion used, right? And so the monitoring team will also be looking at this. So we will have multiple people looking at this, multiple entities, because it's just that important, okay? And so one of the things that I also like to note is that in addition to body camera footage, they will be looking at the stop forms, okay? The stop forms themselves are something that we're looking at to possibly change. We're getting a new CAD and RMS system, and we want to make sure that the stop forms not only indicate what is happening at the stop, but it indicates all of these other factors that could be taken into consideration to make it not just a spreadsheet, but something that we can analyze in-house. Right now, we do not have that capacity because of all these other indicators, and we want to make sure that we get someone in here that can execute it successfully.
If I can also add to that, which we didn't mention before, but it's really important relative to the oversight. The officers not only have body cameras, but we also have, in all of our frontline vehicles, we have dash cameras. So body cameras, as you know, are right on the officers' bodies and so forth. So the dash cameras will give us the ability to look at the actual probable cause from the stop. Was it actually speeding? Was it a stop sign? So all that, again, we have to analyze going forward. May not have been there for the 22 data, but we have that as well readily available for us to analyze as well.
In this report, Dr. Anderson, what are the specific race numbers? I think you said that they were balanced. What are they? Like, what's the breakdown? 25%? Do you have that handy?
Yes.
I can go ahead and jump in on that. So they were balanced when it came to citations, not overall. So overall, the numbers for the 22 mirror the 23. So it is a 2-to-1. So it's about 66% Black African Americans were stopped to a close 33% for whites that were stopped. So they're very close overall. The citations is where they were very similar across race.
Okay, considering that that's 2/3 to 1/3 roughly, and blacks are obviously minorities, there's less blacks, more whites. How is that balanced?
No, Cleveland's a majority black city.
Right, but still, that's still more 66%. So, how is that balanced? What's the...
Well, as the doctor mentioned, in terms of citations, it was balanced, right? And at the end of the day, as I said yesterday when I'm talking to Sarah and Mark, I don't care if you're black, white, yellow, purple, green. If you are speeding in our city, running your red light, the men and women of our police department have to have traffic enforcement and execute the law in a constitutionally appropriate way. Bottom line.
Mayor, could you elaborate for us on your thinking on how you're balancing these two things? Like, how are you following and complying by the consent decree while you're also dealing with these new challenges like street safety?
Nick, it's a great question. It's a challenge, in terms of making sure we support our residents in their call for traffic enforcement and keeping the streets safe. We were doing safety walks all summer. Traffic enforcement was one of the biggest topics that came up. That's why we worked to install nearly 100 speed tables across our city over the last several months. But at the end of the day, we also have a moral responsibility and a constitutional responsibility to enact constitutionally appropriate policing. And I will say this, both the chief and the safety director and the command staff knows this. Since the consent decree, our training has gotten better. We have a brand new generation of officers who understand what being a constitutionally appropriate police officer means in this city because of the consent decree.
We're going to take one more question and then we'll be wrapping it up. One more question.
Last question.
Director Drummond, you said 97% of stops were deemed constitutional when you look back at them. That's 3% that hypothetically weren't. And if we're looking at 17,000 stops per year, quick math would say that's 500 stops perhaps that are problematic. How are you addressing that, and what types of things are being addressed?
That's a fair question. It's a good question. Doesn't mean necessarily that the percentage that you just talked about is necessarily unconstitutional. That's important to understand. It's just that they may be problematic. Part of What we need to do is to analyze that percentage and see if it was unconstitutional. If it was unconstitutional, and then we'll hold those individuals accountable. Part of that, too, is through the complaint process. If individuals felt that they were racially profiled, if the officers were rude, then again, we do have processes in place, which is to go through the Office of Professional Standards. Through their process, if they determine there is criminality involved in it, as I stated before, then that information will be forwarded to an internal affairs for investigation, and it will follow its process.
Dr. Anderson, Chief Todd's going to answer this question, then Chief Todd, and then we're done.
So I just wanted to note that everyone is asking about paragraph 264 and the summary of the data and when we're going to get to the analysis. I want to bring into the conversation paragraph 265. How many of you are familiar with paragraph 265 of the consent decree? Okay, so paragraph 265 of the consent decree calls in the indicators that we need the third party to answer. So they will be helping us with the 265. 265, within 150 days of development of the protocol and annually thereafter, CDP will conduct an assessment and issue a report of all activities, including use of force, arrest, motor vehicle, and investigatory stops, and misconduct complaints alleging discrimination to determine whether CDP's activities are applied or administered in a way that discriminates against individuals on the basis of race, ethnicity, gender, disability, sexual orientation, or gender identity. This report will be based on the data the city is obligated to collect, which we are collecting in paragraph 264. And is not an independent data collection requirement. With that, we will be publicly releasing that report as well. So the independent party will be helping us to fulfill and get it to compliance with paragraph 265.
Chief Todd.
So just one final point to your question about the 3%. We have supervisors as well. And what our supervisors do is they review body camera footage, they review these traffic stops, they review citizens' complaints, and they also make those recommendations through the chain of command if they see that there's an issue. It happens regularly where the officers, the supervisors are identifying things that, if discipline or retraining is warranted, then we do move forward with that.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
That's all we have time for. Our colleagues got to get back to City Council. They got less than 6 minutes. If you have any follow-ups, you can reach out directly to myself or Sergeant Diaz. That's a topic that we can talk about all day, but we have to get to City Council and respect our colleagues over there. Thank you.